Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Need a powerful and entertaining way to ignite your next conference, retreat, or team building session? My keynotes don't include magic, but they do have the power to help your attendees take a leap forward by putting emotional intelligence into their employee engagement, and customer-centric leadership practices. So bring the infotainment creativity of the Fast Leader Show to your next event, and I'll help your attendees get over the hump now. Go to beyondmorale.com/speaking to learn more. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because when I read the title of this person's book, I knew I had to have him on the show. Steve Goldstein was a middle child born in the Bronx borough in New York City and had an older sister and younger brother. His mom was a teacher and his father was a bridge operator. Always a big thinker and explorer as a child, he knew, even with growing up in the city of New York, that there was more to life and he was willing to go get it. Like as a youth, when he worked 2 jobs just so that he can buy a used car. Steve eventually graduated from the City College in New York and NYU Stern for Business School. He's had the good fortune to have worked for 3 Fortune 500 companies, American Express, Citigroup, and Sears, in various senior level positions, including chairman and CEO of American Express Bank. Steve has also worked in the venture capital arena, investing and helping lead startup companies to transform ideas into viable businesses. Being a nonconformist at heart, he's always been challenging the status quo, both in his professional and personal life, and deriving lots of satisfaction in breaking the china and seeing what happens next. Steve is a pioneer at heart. Currently, he's working with several private equity firms as a senior advisor, speaking to large groups and smaller corporate groups about engagement and leadership, and out promoting his new book, Why Are There Snowblowers in Miami? Transform your business using 5 principles of engagement. Steve currently lives in New York City with his wife and has 2 grown kids, both who also live in New York City. Steve Goldstein, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I am. Good morning, Jim. Nice to be with you.
I'm glad you're here. Now, I've given our listeners a little bit about you, but can you tell us what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
My current passion is really around engagement. It's interesting when you go on Google to look at engagement, the first 100 listings or so about weddings and party planners and how to buy a wedding dress and things like that. It's really not a word that has really gone into the lexicon of business. But to me, engagement is really where it starts, because if you're not engaged, it's very hard to be an effective leader. And I've really been fascinated over the last, 20 years about leadership, because at the end of the day, that's what makes a company work. More so than its products, it's the leaders in the company who actually are responsible for the results. And I found that most leaders are not as good as they need to be. And that's part of what I've been working on for the last 20 years. And then eventually I decided I wanted to share my experiences and write a book about that so I could help other leaders, improve.
Well, I mean, when you say engagement, for me, it's kind of funny when you're talking from your perspective, saying how it's not part of the lexicon and business and all of that is, but gosh, I've been so immersed in customer care and engagement of customers and employees for 20 years. So for me, it's kind of like, what do you mean? It's not part of the lexicon. But when you talk about the book and the 5 principles, to me, I think I'm reading it and I'm saying, well, of course, this is common sense, but you're saying, no way, it's not common. But can you share the 5 principles?
Yes. It's funny, when I finished writing the book and I read it probably for the 30th time, my first reaction was, this is so obvious. Who's going to buy this book? And I realized that because it's so obvious is why the book needs to be written. Everybody's looking for the shiny new object or the latest buzzwords or things of that nature. But the reality is that sometimes doing the basics, not sometimes, most times, it's executing on the basics that really makes the difference between success and failure. So I codified these 5 principles basically to give people lanes in which to operate. These are not rules that you have to memorize. These are really sort of flashcards in a way that people can utilize to sort of be aware and observe and then act. So the first one is called fresh eyes, and it's exactly what it means. It means looking at things as if you were a new person coming into a situation. You know, a consultant by definition has fresh eyes. He's coming into a company, he's paid a lot of money, and he looks at things and he asks lots of crazy questions. A new CEO who comes into a company does the same thing. But if you've been the president of a company for 5 years, a lot of what is happening in your company is actually hiding in plain sight, and you don't see it. And it's in those areas that there's gold, but you have to look for it. The second one is connecting. What I mean by connecting is it's really engaging at the most intimate level with your employees and your customers. If you think about a store like the Gap, the number of levels between the CEO of the Gap and the part-time sales clerk in San Francisco selling you a t-shirt is in excess of 20. So the issue is that the part-time person who's making $9 an hour is the only person who's interacting with the customer. And the leaders sit in meetings all day reviewing numbers and presentations, and they really don't have a clue as to what's actually going on at the point of sale. And the amazing thing is that these people who are interacting with customers, they know exactly what's going on. They know what's working. They know what's not working. The things that are not working, they know how to fix. They know what the customers want because they're hearing from them in real time what they need and want. But no one's asking them. So the whole part of connecting is getting out of your office. I was giving a speech the other day and someone says, "What do you mean get out of your office?" I said, nothing good happens in your office, nothing. And you should spend as little time there as possible. So that's the second principle. The third principle is transparency. I actually on the door of my high school, carved in stone, was a saying, "Knowledge is power." And I didn't know what it meant when I was going to high school, but I do now. And I'm a firm believer that the more people know, the more successful and effective they can be. We suffer from two problems now. We either suffer from not giving people enough information because we don't trust them, or it's a power thing where, you have to ask me for stuff and that makes me more powerful because you don't know the information. And it's done in a very sort of subconscious way. So one problem is you don't have enough information to do your job properly. The flip side of that situation is you're buried in information. You don't know what report to look at. You don't know what's important, okay? So the whole thing about transparency is really being open and trusting your employees and communicating with them in a way where they can actually do a great job. The fourth one is speed. Mario Andretti, the famous race car driver, has a great quote. He says, "If your car's under control, you're not going fast enough." And the problem, and this is particularly true with larger companies move at glacial pace. They express things in terms of months, quarters, and years. I was in a meeting in June with the C-suite of this very large company. And in this meeting, we came up collectively with a great idea. I mean, it was really a tremendous idea. And the CEO said, "Well, let's put that into our planning process for 2017. We'll bake it into next year's plan." And they're all saying, "Great." And I said, "Wait a minute. If this is really a great idea, why don't we have someone start it next week?" Because you have to believe that there are 3 other meetings like this going on around the world where they all think they've come up with the next brilliant idea, which is the same one as we just came up with, right? And one of those companies is going to start it next week. And they may have it in the marketplace by the end of this year. So if you put it in the plan for next year, by the time this actually hits the market, it could be the summer of 2017. And this other company could have walked away with all the wins. And they said, "Oh, do you really think that's going to happen?" I said, "Of course it's going to happen." The fifth principle I call hot buttons. And this is really, it's fascinating to go through this process. None of the ideas are stupid. None of the initiatives are dumb. But they're nice to do, they're nice to have, but they're not jugular. I'm talking about things like, if we don't do this, we're dead. If we don't do this, we're going to lose market share. If we don't do this, we can't grow at 15% compounded for the next 3 years. So going through the process of really figuring out what's absolutely essential from what is nice to do is really the important thing. So that's a brief summary of the 5 principles.
Okay, so one thing that really stood out to me, and like you said, a lot of them speak for themselves. I mean, you use hot buttons a little bit differently than what most people do in regards to thinking about hot buttons. When hot buttons, they're referring to, hey, that really upset me, that really ticked me off. But you're talking about hot buttons in a different way.
Right.
So your hot buttons are really things that are going to ignite people to do something different.
Yes, and they're exactly, and they're expressed in a way that doesn't use jargon. You know, it's done in a way where someone in the 3rd grade would understand what the item is, so that everyone in the company is very clear on what these 3 items are. Oftentimes, what happens is, you know, the leader will say something in a manner that makes sense to him, but if it doesn't resonate throughout the organization, people may have slightly different interpretations about what that means. So part of the hot button component is to be very precise with the words, so that whether you're in 30 states or 30 countries, everyone in the organization knows exactly what those mean and why they're important.
And also, it seems to me like you have to really look at towards the operating or the functional position, because you gave an example in the book where you talked about a used car company and their financing expenses, and saying how a used car sitting on the lot cost $2 a day just in interest.
Yes.
And just by communicating the fact that $2 a day was something that was occurring, caused people to act and behave quite differently than they did previously.
Exactly. And you know, what was interesting is, if you think about that example, the people who this was directed to, or the people who responded to this, I should say, were mechanics. They were auto mechanics. These are people who basically probably don't have more than a high school education. They certainly don't have college degrees. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense. What I'm saying is, these guys are master mechanics. They know how to fix cars better than anybody else. But now, when they understood there was a financial consequence for every day the car was sitting there and not out on the lot to be sold, they themselves figured out how to change their work processes to move the cars faster through the shop. They came up with this because they understood there was a consequence to not getting the cars out a day or 2 or 30 days sooner. And that was the beauty of this hot button, that people at all levels in the company could take away from it what was essential for them to do their own jobs better. And then, working in teams, they brainstormed and came up with 20 ideas about how individually and collectively they could change the way they behaved in order to recognize this $2 a day thing. It frankly was amazing to me to see how they responded, way beyond what I ever might have expected. And that's the beauty of that.
And so for me, I think it's kind of like using fresh eyes in order to find out what's the right hot button. I think we have to do that. So you're a tenured a person who has accumulated a wealth of wisdom, and I'm sure it's being leveraged by the venture capitalists that you're working with. But we need inspiration. This book is inspirational in the 5 principles. I would love to even get in the conversation about the difference between principles and rules, but we got to move on. And so when you start talking about quotes, we love quotes on the show. And I'm sure you have a lot that you've accumulated over the years. But is there 1 or 2 that you can share with us that gives you inspiration?
There's one quote that I came across, I think it was in the late 70s, in a Business Week article. And it was said by a guy named Edward Cole, who was an executive at General Motors. He had been a lifelong employee of General Motors. And I think at this point, he was running the engine business in one of the divisions. And this is what he wrote, or this is what he said. Leadership is the courage to admit mistakes, the vision to welcome change, the enthusiasm to motivate others, and the confidence to stay out of step when everyone is marching to the wrong tune. And that, to me, sort of epitomized what a great leader should do. And actually, I try to follow this. I mean, I really do my best to follow this. And it's not always the most popular way to behave. But I think this quote really sums up what I believe a leader should be.
Well, I think even reading your bio when you started talking about breaking the china and seeing what happens, I can see why that quote means a lot to you. And obviously, in order for you to get from the point of being that, young kid in the Bronx who was that constant, explorer and wanting more and knowing there was more, to being the CEO of some, large divisions for some very large organizations, there's had to be a lot of humps along the way that you've had to get over that caused you to get to the place that you are now, where you are now, and, being able to write this book and help others move forward. But, is there a story that you can share with us when you had to get over the hump?
Well, the most, I think, profound story is really the story that became the title of the book. When I was at Sears running the credit card business, and I'll give you the short version of this, the longer version's in the book. But I was based in Chicago, obviously, where Sears is headquartered. And it was February, it was a blistery cold, winter, like the polar vortexes we just had. And I had to go to Miami to give a speech in February. So I was very excited to go to the warm weather. And I always made a point to visit the stores to see what we could do to help, improve sales. So I went into the store and I happened to go into the lawn and garden center entrance. And I saw, lawnmowers, rakes, shovels, patio furniture, barbecue grills. And then I saw 4 snowblowers. And, I thought I was hallucinating. And I went over to see them, and there was an elderly salesman there named Pete. And it just came out of my mouth. I said, "Pete, why are there snowblowers in Miami?" And, basically the short version of the story is every September, the snowblowers were delivered. They were told to put on the floor. Every April, they packed them back in cartons and sent them back to the distribution center. And when I said to him, what do you do about it? And he says, well, my boss calls, his boss calls, the store manager calls, and they're basically told it's part of the national allocation. I said, do you know what that means? He says, I have no idea what that means. I said, have you ever sold any? He said, we sold one to a couple who was visiting their kids in Minnesota for Christmas. They put it in a minivan and they drove up from Miami to Minnesota. That was it. So the next day I go back to I gave my speech. It was like this thing was bothering me the whole afternoon. We had our weekly leadership meeting, and not surprisingly, we were out of snowblowers because of this snowstorm. And I pull out of my pocket this guy's business card, and I say, well, there are 4 in Miami. Call Pete, and you'll have them. And they're hysterically laughing. And I said, why is this funny? And they go, no, it's hysterical. And I said, no, it's terrible. And so, I then had this is pre-internet, I had my assistant find out in the history of recorded weather, how much has it snowed in Miami? And she came back, 45 minutes later and said it snowed one time 7 years ago, 1/3 of an inch. So you say to yourself, well, how the heck could this be part of a national allocation? And, to me, it was a metaphor. I started to think at that moment of all the other sort of experiences I had that were equally insane. And, in golf, you get a mulligan if you hit a bad shot. You don't get 30 mulligans. And so this was not just a problem that someone sent snowblowers to Miami. The problem was that no one was looking, no one cared, no one saw these things going back and forth for 30 years, no one was asking questions, no one was interested to talk to the store manager. I mean, it was a complete and utter breakdown in business processes. And by the way, it's not unique to Sears. Every company has snowblowers. In fact, when I went to write the book, I interviewed 15 CEOs, and I told them all the story because I wanted them to understand what I wanted from them in return. And out of the 15 people I interviewed, I had the same reaction 100% of the time. First, they laughed. Then they said, that's crazy. And then they said, oh, I've got 20 snowblower stories. Which one do you want to hear? It became a noun because people have all seen this craziness.
Sorry. It is. How could you not laugh? So I have to know what, I mean, you went back and you had that meeting, and what eventually happened with the whole snowblower thing in Miami?
So I don't know when it happened, but this December, just literally, almost a year, less than a year ago, I finished the book. and I was going to go down to Miami to see if they're still there. I said, let me call. And I called the store and I said, can I? So it turns out they're no longer there. So they weren't there this December. I don't know when in the prior 20 years they stopped being shipped there, but finally the practice was corrected. So, because I thought it would have been hysterical if they were still there, I could take a picture and put it in the book. But fortunately, they're no longer there.
Whew, well, at least, if we all only had 20 years in order to fix problems, I guess maybe they'd all get fixed sometime. I don't know. Or is it kind of run into an infinity? I have no idea. Okay, so you had mentioned something about working as an advisor, working with a lot of venture capital firms, working with a lot of different organizations in order to help them with these 5 principles and all of that. But you also talked about several other things that you're working on. But what are some of your goals?
My goals now are really to I have a few goals. One is to work with private equity firms to help them run their portfolio companies more effectively, and that really comes from leadership. So I'm spending a lot of time with them, working with their individual companies, as well as helping them evaluate new acquisitions. I'm spending a fair amount of time writing, in part to promote the book, but in part to just get my ideas down on paper or on blogs and sort of promulgate some of those thoughts. I'm spending time promoting the book because now that I have the book out there, I want to, let people know about the book so that they can buy it and learn from it and apply some of the things that are in the book. I spend a lot of time trying to keep fit, which I think is really important, so that you can enjoy your life. My wife and I like to travel, so we've incorporated that. We took a great trip almost a year ago to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. It's a part of the world that I always wanted to see, and so that was a lot of fun. I haven't had the time, but I'm trying to carve out the time to re-engage. It's back to engagement, playing the saxophone. I played the saxophone when I was a kid, and I just decided I want to, after a long hiatus, I want to get back and start playing again. So that's keeping me pretty busy.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. The number one thing that contributes to customer loyalty is emotions. So move onward and upward faster by gaining significantly deeper insight and understanding of your customer journey and personas with emotional intelligence. With your empathy mapping workshop, you'll learn how to evoke and influence the right customer emotions that generate improved customer loyalty and reduce your cost to operate. Get over your emotional hump now by going to empathymapping.com to learn more. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Steve, the Hump Day Hoedown is a part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Steve Goldstein, are you ready to hoe down?
Yes.
All right. So what do you think is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
I think I'm pretty good as a leader right now, and I think what I've learned is it's more about finesse. Which I think comes with practice. And I'm very conscious about this. I work at this every day. I'm very careful about what I say. I'm very careful about how I listen. And it's all designed with the notion of how do I get the person I'm interacting with or the people I'm interacting with to really understand what we need to do and to enable them to be more successful. I don't think there's an end state here. I think it's just something like being a great artist or anything else where, it's not something that's measurable. I think it's just something that you keep finessing and doing, and you just get a little better every day.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
The best leadership advice I've ever received, which was actually from my first boss when I got out of graduate school, is to treat everyone the same, whether it's the cleaning lady or the president of the company. I was in a meeting with him. I was, 25 years old, and we were doing an all-nighter because we had a big pitch we were making. And I went into his office at 11 o'clock to show him my work and to see how he was going to mark it up with a red pen. And so we're in this heated discussion, and the cleaning lady walks in to clean his office. And he starts talking to her like his best friend. How's her kids? His son had broken his leg and everything. And she leaves. And I said, you know the cleaning lady? And he goes, yeah. I mean, she's got a family, she's got a life. And, I realized, and he was curious, because I didn't know how you were supposed to, I just had this, I don't know, I was stupid. I thought if you're an executive, you don't talk to certain people. But that's what you saw in movies or in TV. And so I saw from him in a very human way that you really do treat people the same. And so I've been doing this from that moment on. I mean, I became friends with a window washer when I lived in London, in our building, who all of my leadership team thought this crazy American is going out to the pub with the window washer. What's wrong with him? And I told them I learned more from this guy than I learned from them about our company, because he was in the building every day. He knew everything that was going on.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
I'm very inquisitive. I've always been this way. And I think the question I ask most is why. I think a lot of people, and I was just talking to somebody about this the other day in a board meeting, everybody focuses on what and how and where and when, and it's all static. But the real motivation for understanding why things happen, no one asks. I mean, that if you made $20 this year and last quarter you made 10, you doubled your results. Great. But most people don't know why. And if you don't know why, you have no reason to assume it's going to be the same next month, because you don't know what caused it in the first place. And I know this sounds silly, but I'm amazed that people really don't dig. A lot of retailers, when they have bad results, they blame the weather. It's amazing to me that a food like a Walmart will say, we had great results. Macy's will say we didn't have great results and it was attributable to the weather. Are they operating in a different weather system than Walmart? So you have to laugh when you hear that, because what it really means is they don't know. They're just grasping at straws to come up with something that seemingly explains what is inexplicable, because they really don't know what the underlying reason for the outcome is.
What is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
I think my best tool is to listen very hard and ask a lot of questions.
What would be one book, and it could be from any genre, that you'd recommend to our listeners?
The book I would recommend is Why Are There Snowblowers in Miami? No, actually, I would recommend that book. But a good book that I read recently, which I thought was terrific, is David McCullough's book about the Wright brothers. When you realize what these two guys did to learn how to fly, to prove that man could fly, it was one of the most inspiring books about persistence, stick-to-itiveness, ingenuity, solving problems, working as a team, marching to their own beat when everybody was telling them they were, marching to the wrong tune. It was just a fantastic book.
Okay, Fast Leader listeners, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Steve Goldstein. Okay, Steve, this is my last Hump Day Hold On question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you've been given the opportunity to take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you. But you can't take everything. You can only choose one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
I think the thing I would do differently is to learn how to collaborate better and work more effectively in teams. When I was younger, it was more about proving myself and sort of creating my own space and seeing what I could do to move up in the business world. And I think I always was a good team player, but I probably was a little bit more interested in moving myself forward than moving the team forward with, being conscious about it. I mean, subconsciously, I'm sure I was, but not consciously. And today I'm extremely conscious of that. I know that you really need to have an effective team to get great results, just like in sports.
Steve, it was an honor to spend time with you today. Can you please share with Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is on my website, StephenDGoldstein.com, or on Twitter at SDGoldstein, or you can shoot me an email at steve@sdgoldstein.com.
Steve Goldstein, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.